Good evening, family. How's everybody doing? Hope everybody's having a wonderful night. Um, just thank you guys again for this special coffee call that we're on today. We got a wonderful brother of mine joining us. And the crazy part is he's coming all the way from Singapore, and so it's a good brother of mine, and I'm so glad that we can make this happen. It's crazy. You would think, well, maybe you won't think, but for me, especially as an Asian guy, you would think that we'll get the times right and the math would be there. But me, I was just tripping out. I was like, what day are we doing this? And so we're trying to figure that out. And I'm glad that we made it happen. Actually, another colleague of mine that I went to and seminary with. And so he's a smart dude. And so I'm gonna bring him on and we're just having a good time just having this conversation. So we're gonna bring his brother on. My brother's name is Ollie Lim, coming in from Singapore. Here we go. What's going on, brother? How you doing, man?
Hi, not too bad. How are you, Paul?
Good, good. Thank you, Ollie, for making this time and making this happen.
Oh, I'm very happy to join you on your talk show. I've been following you guys a little bit. Seeing the stuff that you post and the guests that you've had online. So it's quite an honor to be here with you.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you here, and thank you for taking the time all the way from, across the world to make this happen. And so, I think people might be a little bit confused because usually I do this in the morning, so they're like, "Is Paul messed up with the timing?" So no, but we're right. We're right where we're supposed to be, and so we're probably gonna have
Right.
other people jump on as they go. And always, this is gonna be, restreamed again later on, and so you
Right.
guys can check that out on Facebook and on YouTube. And so thanks again, Ali, for coming on. The crazy part is, for you guys that don't know, the way I met Ali was strange because one day I was in class and I see this guy. He was I think he was a TA, but I thought he was first a professor because he was teaching this section on interfaith dialogue, and I was like, man, this guy's really good. So I thought he was like a PhD student when I first met him. And then the next semester, we're in the same class. So I'm like, okay, he's our TA again. So I got to look good. And then he's like participating. I'm like, is he a classmate? I think he's a classmate. And so he ended up being my classmate, a good friend. And we had some really good conversations, and so I can't wait to hear what you got to say. So tell us about yourself a little bit. Where you at, what you're doing, and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. So my name is Ollie. It's short for Oliver. Um, Either one is fine. I'm from Singapore, which is pretty far away from the United States. It's about an 18-hour flight from Los Angeles, so it's like across the Pacific. Well, like contrary to prior belief, we are not in China. We're at the tip of the Malaysian Peninsula in Southeast Asia. So I grew up there, like all my life. But then I left for college to United Kingdom in the University of Edinburgh. So that's where I did my first degree. And a couple of years later, came back to Singapore. Had a bit of a call, decided to go into ministry, and went to Claremont, and that's where I met Paul. I've just finished my MDiv and graduated at the same time just a couple months ago in June. And now I am looking forward to start my PhD, and my PhD is going to be at Emmanuel College at the University of Toronto. So it's a small United Church of Canada seminary at the University of Toronto, but they have sort of like people from different denominations and different religions as well. So they are trying to move towards being a more interreligious seminary, slightly like Claremont School of Theology. Uh, I'm not from the United Church of Canada. I'm not from the United Church of Christ. I consider myself Episcopalian, so I was baptized in the Anglican Communion. But in Singapore, I worship at a progressive church, the only sort of liberal church in Singapore, just one. So it's probably slightly less diverse in terms of denominations in Singapore than it is in the US. So it was really interesting for me to sort of like, go to the US and see what Christianity was like, and, sort of meet friends from, all different denominations and, different theologies. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, well, thanks, Sally, for a lot. I learned a lot from you about your passion and your calling. So can you talk a little bit about that, like what you're passionate about, especially when it comes to interreligious dialogue or interfaith dialogue? So tell us something about that.
Yeah, so I grew up in an interreligious family, so I've always been intrigued by the way people sort of perceive God and perceive religion and spirituality. Like I'm interested to know why there are so many different ways of understanding God on
Mm,
this earth, right? Like and because of that, I decided to go more and sort of do more research in that area because I'm just curious. Like, and I'm also curious as to understand what is the glue that holds people of difference together, like people with different beliefs, people with different practices. And I think growing up in Singapore is a really multicultural country. In fact, it's a city state, so we're about a third the size of Greater Los Angeles. Um, if you look at LA County, we're probably a third of the size of LA County, or maybe slightly smaller than third. And we have about 5 million people, so we are a very dense country.
mm,
Majority of the people are of Chinese descent, so a lot of us can trace our ancestry back to China, like southern China in particular. But we have a substantial number of people that are Malay, so they are from the Malayan Peninsula, Indonesia, Malaysia, sort of this Southeast Asian region. And we have a sizable minority that can trace their ancestry back to South India, so Tamil Nadu and Kerala in particular, Tamil Nadu in particular. So we have been a melting pot of cultures for a long time. In the last couple decades, we see a lot of other people coming from different parts of Southeast Asia and the world, and there's a lot of cultural mixing here. So some of our oldest sort of like ethnic groups are like Eurasian and like Peranakan. So they are sort of like a mixture between like Europeans and Asians, and a mixture between like sort of Chinese and Malay peoples. So it's really a very diverse country. I would say we are pretty pluralistic as well, although we don't talk about it enough. I think one of our strong points is sort of like the cultural mixing, but I think people here are still sort of really divided into their own ethnic groups or their own religious groups. But like people are aware that a lot of mixing occurs, a lot of like theological exchanges occurs.
mm.
There's a lot of cultural appropriation of different sorts. There's a lot of cultural appreciation of different sorts. I think people usually have a very negative view on what appropriation is, but like
Mm.
appropriation happens all the time. Like that's what happens when cultures mix. It's how do you understand that, and how do you sort of like how aware of that you are, and how it sort of influences the way we live our life. I think that's something that people are less aware of.
Wow,
So yeah,
yeah.
Singapore, and because it's such a diverse country, it's just I think it's just something that I just picked up along the way, like the hobby of just learning about different cultures and different religions. That just been a key interest of mine since I was a young boy.
Right. Yeah, man. I think one of the things that I've learned going to CST and being with so many diverse people, not just in culture, race, but theologies and perspectives and interpretation of the Bible, is there is something that ties us together that's outside of us, right?
Mm,
And even though we come together with this sort of passion to do this type of work, but there's something outside of us that brings us together, or brings us to a point where we want to know in a deeper level what's going on, right?
right, right.
And that's where a lot of the times the interpretations and how we see scripture or other faith literature, right? And even though, and I just want to just make sure, even though that me and Ali might not agree on some of the stuff and we have different perspective on some of the things, I think as just people, um, there has to be this sense of coming together with compassion, right? There has to be this sense, because and I'm just gonna say it, like, it doesn't. I mean, any God people believe in, I think one of the main thing is like people, right? and coming together and coming to, and especially with love and with compassion, with humility. There's like the center message of all that, and then we get into interpretations or what is deity and stuff like that. But in the bottom of it, I think that is very important for us to see that as people of God and as people of that were created. In my interpretation, we're created in His image. There has to be the sense of likeness to coming together. And so,
Right.
so that's what I appreciated a lot when I studied over there. It was wild. I'm not gonna lie, it was wild the things I heard. But I think it sometimes we have to get out of what we only think with our own, sometimes limited mind, and continue to study, and just know that there are people out there that think about other things. And so that's what I appreciate about you. And then you're really eloquent. I mean, the last like 3 minutes, what you said just blew my mind already. I mean, some of the stuff I already missed. I don't know what you said, but it was good. And so, and I just want to get right into it. I brought you on for a reason, because of your passion for interfaith religious dialogue. I wanted to kind of center this community. I wanted to center this conversation on, and we talked about it, this intra-faith um, dialogue and coming together within the Protestant Christian community, because especially in this times, um, especially in the Western side or America, during especially these times where we have a pandemic, we have these sort of racial divides going on. Um, where is the church supposed to be, and how come we're not coming together more and
Mm.
more? And so yeah, let's talk some about that. And just first of all, how are you, or how is Singapore dealing with COVID, and what are some of the stuff that happened?
Right. So we just kind of opened up about 2 months ago. Like we sort of lifted our lockdowns about 2 months already. It's been a while. So the country's been opened up for business. Everybody's back to work and stuff. Kids back to school for about 2 months. And I guess I would say that initially they didn't handle the pandemic as well as we've expected them to, because we've gone through like major pandemic like SARS in the past. But I must say, overall, the government here did a pretty good job. Going to give them credit for that. And I think because of that, our numbers are actually pretty low right now. We're only seeing a daily increase of about 50 cases a day, and we haven't had anyone dying of COVID for weeks right now.
Mm,
So I think that's really good. One thing that there was a bit of a hindsight in Singapore is that Singapore depends a lot on migrant labor, like low wage
mm,
migrant labor, to build our city, to clean our streets and stuff like that. So a lot of these migrant workers, they live in dormitories, sort of like at the edges of the city, right? These huge dormitories where you see like thousands and thousands of people, like stuff. So like there was a little bit of a hindsight, because the government sort of like missed these core group of people, because they live in such crowded
right.
conditions, dense
Mm,
conditions. When someone gets infected with COVID, like it sort of spreads out of control. So what they had to do was had to lock down like these dormitories around the country. So there was like sort of immense spread within these dormitories, like the numbers were like increasing, like at one point in time up to 1,000 cases a day within these dormitories. So like the community was fine. Like we were seeing like a spread of like maybe 6 people a day out in the community, but like in these dormitories you're seeing like close to 1,000. So like it sort of like exposes the fact that in society, and I think this reflects wider society beyond Singapore, that it's pretty unequal, and there are people that are getting affected by this more, although this disease is not supposed to discriminate, right? Like as
right.
long as you're human you get it, but like there are specific groups of people that sort of get it more, right? And these are the people that are low income earners. They live in overcrowded conditions. They don't have as good an access to healthcare like you and I have. And I think this very much also reflects the whole issue of racism around the world, especially in places where there is a significant majority and also a significant minority, right? And that minority
Right.
is going to feel the effects of racism as well, right? Because like maybe when things are set up, when countries were set up, like like after, I don't know, especially in Singapore after colonialism ended, like you notice that institutions that are set up, they do, inadvertently sort of just um benefit the majority, right? Because the
Right.
people that sort of set up the country are from a specific cultural group, so they are going to sort of interpret rules, regulations, and the way things are done from their cultural perspective. So, like when they set up these institutions are going to have a little bit of a bend towards people that are of that specific ethnic group, like the majority ethnic group. So
Right.
it is not difficult to see like minority ethnic groups getting affected by these, right? I mean, like I guess in your face racism is pretty rare for the most part in daily life, but like small little stuff like institutional stuff, like the stuff that doesn't really come out a lot but comes out when like there are stereotypes involved, when there are misunderstandings, cultural misunderstandings involved, that is the stuff that sort of comes out. And I guess using that COVID analogy, right, you realize that COVID is here.
Right.
It's supposed to affect everyone. It doesn't really affect everyone because of the way our society is set up. So
Right.
it's the case with racial prejudice, or prejudice based on different identities, sort of like factors as well.
That's good, Ali. Is there like did that trigger some things in Singapore?
In Yes, it definitely did. Like we just had our general election like about a month ago, and I think COVID was a really hot topic, and not just how the government was managing COVID like as a whole, but the fact that there's this sort of like unequal impact, and I think it sort of opened a lot of Singaporeans' eyes to the fact that a lot of us are really privileged to
Mm,
live where we are, and the fact that
right.
even in our country, like a country as small as us, like a significant group of people are sort of impacted, by COVID even more than the rest of us. So like I think it really just got a lot of us to think about like, who we are in society, and
Right.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, it opens our eyes to a lot of these things, these underlining things that happens to institution or the dominant culture and how it impacts people differently. And I guess my question is, as just geographically outside the Western world, how big is America's influence to the rest of the world? You think?
Right. So America, in my opinion, is still like the global power. Like people still very much look towards America as like the leader of the free world. Well, not even the leader of the free world, the leader of the world, right? Like
Mm,
a lots of trade still goes through America. America is still the world's biggest economy, and not only that, like the cultural influence of America on the rest of the world is very significant. Like we
mm,
get, like although there are a lot of countries around the world that don't speak English as a first language, but you can look at the impact of Hollywood, right? I mean, just look at like Disney, right? Like the Disney characters, like now they've bought over Marvel and stuff, and like that has like seeped into the consciousness of almost everyone in the world, right? Like we're always so
wow.
excited when the next Disney movie comes out, the next Marvel movie comes out, and that is and to us that might seem like an accurate depiction of America, although it might not. But at the same time, like just aside from like the stuff they create in Hollywood, like CNN, like news and stuff, right? Like a lot of people around the world, if they want to get their English news, they still depend on channels like CNN, right, which is
Right.
American run. So it's very significant, not just the economic and political side of things, but the cultural side of things. America is still a major influence in the world.
Right. Yeah, and and obviously, um obviously there's some things going on in America now that seems to show this depiction of divide amongst race, divide amongst culture. And so in your opinion, or from actually just being Singaporean, and from that, I mean, we can't speak for every country in the world, but in your opinion, how is people looking at America right now, that's in the rest of the world, you think? What's your interpretation?
Right. So I
No,
I
what's our
think
grade right now?
I think I think things start to change a lot when this coronavirus situation happened, and like people were observant around the world on how countries actually approach this virus. I think we are well aware that this virus originated from China. I think
Mhm.
almost every single person around the world knows that. And yes, I think we also are aware that the Chinese government at the point of time had taken some missteps, right? And like they didn't want to China East Asian people, face is really important, right? They don't want to lose face in front of the world.
Right,
So a lot of
right.
people are like, oh, this virus is not such a big thing. Whistleblowers are silenced. But I think after a while, like even the Chinese government realized that they screwed up, right? Like, and it started to really spread around the world, and that's when they like first spread around China and then around the world, and then they really took it really seriously from then on, and they sort of like did this really draconian lockdown, and if you look at today, like their cases are still hovering around 80,000, and I think that's a really small number
Wow.
considering they have like 1.5 billion people. So I would think they did a good job. But I also am aware that they could only do that because they aren't a democracy, right? Like, they are still a single party, like political state. They are communist, so it's easy for them to do. But I think when the virus actually went to America, people were more interested in how like democracies respond, especially a country as politically, economically, and culturally powerful like the US, right? With the amount of influence that they have on the world, how would they do, right? And I think people were actually surprised at the political situation of America and how this pandemic literally crippled America and literally exposed like the fault lines of like political fault lines and economic fault lines in America, right, to the rest of the world. So I think
Wow.
a lot of people in the world were really shocked that these kind of things happen. I think that whatever issues politically like America has, like people around the world, they might not be as sort of like into it like as you would be if you are living in that country, right? I mean, like small things like local elections, even elections up to Congress, like people aren't really very invested in that outside of America. People are more invested in sort of like the presidential elections and stuff like
Right.
that. And I think
Right.
people get a glimpse of what America is to that, but people never really had that sort of gigantic view of America till this COVID situation happened, and till the fact that America is number one in cases
Wow.
around the world. So I think right now most people don't really have a very good impression of America, but maybe there is some bias as well because we sort of like think of America as this really sort of dominant and powerful
Mm.
country that like can do whatever basically whatever they want in the world,
Right.
and stuff, and we
Right.
still look to them for leadership and stuff like that. So I think people are just surprised that America isn't able to get this, under control. And like, of course, like right now, with major powers, like in the world being like China, Russia, and the US, I think people are sort of looking a lot more at like these three countries and how they responded. And I think people were really surprised that the Chinese were able to respond to this virus, much better
Yeah.
than the United States. But bearing in mind that China is a communist country after all. But I think that I would say like internationally that people sort of are aware that the perception like of global power has shifted a bit, like the goalposts have shifted a bit, and I think a lot of the power right now that America used to enjoy has sort of moved outside of America. And I
Wow.
think a lot of that would also be like perceptions of how the US is doing. And I think in Singapore at least people are fair. People like, okay, there are things that you can compare like US and China with, and there are things you can't. So basically a lot of people here compared coronavirus situation in the US to sort of like Europe as a whole, right? And then as how individual European countries are doing, considering the fact that most Americans, right, white Americans, they all come from Europe, right? Like, so majority of the US has a European heritage. So like
Right.
I think it surprised people that like European countries are doing just so much better in managing this virus than the US has. Like, I mean, I would say like there are many Asian countries that did it a little bit better than the European countries, but like they have gotten it under control for the most part, but it's still sort of like raging out of control in the US. So this really
Yeah.
shows the world like
Mm.
what like the political and economic situation is in America right now, and then they judge from that, like
Wow.
what it's like. Yeah.
Yeah, well, seems like we're not doing so hot after what you said. Um, and so, I asked this because, as a minority, right, as coming from an ethnic community, but at the same time, born and raised in America, we sometimes have this dual perception of America ourselves, right? Um, so my wife is from Korea, and so the way she looks at America and the way I look at America is totally different, two different perceptions. And I
Right.
think it's important to know everybody is listening and will be listening, that not everybody was born here. Not everybody, is not everybody recognizes or even contributes to this American dream or whatever, right? There's some here that have been forcefully, brought. There's some here
Mm-hmm.
that are voluntarily here, but for their own benefit, right? And there's some here that are just here because they have nowhere else to go. You know what I mean? And because
Right.
America is set up in
Right.
a way
Yeah.
where and because American system is set up in a way where we have this freedom, to succeed in the way we can, and even
Yeah.
though everybody thinks that's a good thing, which is, but there's some stuff that brings with freedom, right? Which could be sometimes arrogance or greed or too much ambition. And so
Mm-hmm.
and also because we're so diverse here, right? We're not a homogenous country. And I
No.
think,
Right.
yeah, so I think right now, um whether that's COVID or other things that led up to where we are now, has really opened our eyes as humans to see, like, man, like, where do we live, like, what are we doing, are we
Yeah.
living for ourselves, or are we trying to build this thing, or are we just trying to get as much as we can as fast as we can and not care about everybody else. And
Right.
so, yeah, and so what do you think about that? What do you think about, like, immigrants that come to America to better their life, but at the same
Right.
time may not follow the traditional American dream that the Europeans came with, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think that is a question that America has to answer
Mhm.
for itself. I think it's good that that Americans are asking these questions right now and also looking to other countries with bigger immigrant populations, like what they're doing and stuff like that. And but the thing is that I think America is very different, like the way that it's set up, the fact that it's such a huge population, it's such a huge land area and stuff like that. And I mean, like to be fair, a lot of the stuff that we think about in the US about the American dream and stuff like that, I would say that it's still positive in a lot of ways, and it's something that other countries look to America for, and they want to have it themselves in their country as well. But and I think that's why the US has so many immigrants. But I think when immigrants start to move to the US, when they start to believe in the American dream, and then they start to have kids and like generation stuff like that, like perceptions are obviously going to change, right?
Mhm.
Like perceptions are going to change with the world, and the world is changing and stuff. And I think a lot of people that maybe are in America not because of their own choice, either because they're born there, because they just need to go there to escape poverty or like wars in
Right.
their country, they might perceive this American dream really differently, right? To them, it might be more of like having a stable family, like having a nice job, not having to worry about things, and they may not have that sort of mindset that, oh, I need to like do this and this and this to achieve this and this and this and stuff like that, right? It's not
Right.
going to be the same anymore. So because of this diversity, I think the US as a whole like needs to talk about like what these means to them, and how like culture is going to change, and like the world's going to move forward and stuff like that.
Right.
We're not going to move into a time where like Americans golden age or heyday or whatever that might mean to people from America. And the thing is that how well do you respond to these changes, both externally that you get from the world, and also internally from people who are have a different perspective within the country. And I think that is something that Americans have to decide, like by themselves, right, on their own, and but
Yeah.
also decide in a way that everybody has a voice and everybody should be heard
Yeah.
at the table. I think, and I think that's something that is a great hallmark of the US, right? Like democracy, and and giving everybody a voice. And I
Right.
think if people do stick to these sort of like notions that people believe very strongly themselves, I'm very sure that America can progress with a good dialogue, and like hearing everybody out, and at the same time maintaining their status as a global power.
Yeah. Global power. Yeah. um Yeah, and at the same time, there are people that voluntarily don't want a voice. They just want to just just slide underneath, you know,
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
that's whether that's assumptions of status and where we are when it comes to, and that's a whole different conversation, right? Status
Mhm.
and citizenship and all that stuff. And because
Yeah.
you have somebody like my parents, like my dad. Oh my gosh, like this guy's like he would always tell me this story, like, Paul, I used to stand on top of the mountain and look over the sea, and he would say, this is the East Sea, and then there's the Pacific, and then there's California, right? Because we come the other way. And so
Hmm.
he's like, that's where I want to be, you know
Right.
and who says that, right? And it's, you don't see a lot of Americans saying, they look out to the to the sky and say, you know what, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go that way. Maybe some, but not a lot. But when you see those types of, and it's just a lot of immigrants too. They think America. They have this perception of America as like, as soon as I get here, everything will be okay. You know, but at the same time, what does that mean to
Right.
people? What is okay? What is success? And sometimes those things divide us, right? Because
Yeah.
everybody has a different perspective of success, different perspective of, like you said, like this dream, right? And so we have to talk about this, and not just America. And this is a great segue, not just America, but churches as well, right? Churches as well
Hmm.
have to
Hmm.
continue
That's
to
right.
have this dialogue, because as soon as these things happen, um, especially within, well, my experience for the past 4 or 5 months, there's a lot of talk about the Protestant church, especially when it comes to like evangelicals and progressives or whatever. Where is the coming together, right? Where is this type of dialogues
Mhm.
coming together? So I know that you're the guy that thinks about these things. Where do you think that, especially in, so it's weird because, I mean, I could talk. So it's weird because even in the Protestant umbrella, we have um so many different camps, right? You have the progressive camp, the the middle camp, and then you have the traditional conservative camp. And so even in those camps, we can't even seem to talk because they're divided by denominations, cultural expressions. And so in a very broad way, when we talk about the Protestant Christian community, what do you think we need to do? Like, where do we start, so we can kind of, have tolerance for one another,
Right.
but at the same time know that, I don't know, So what do you think?
Right. So I think it's the whole understanding of the notion of oneness, I guess, that we need to think about a lot more, like as a church. I think
Mhm.
a lot of us are raised with the idea that there is only one way to God because God is one, right? There's only one God. So this notion of singularity and oneness comes out a lot in Christianity as a whole. And I think when we think about oneness, right, we think that everybody should think the same way as us, everybody should feel the same way as us, everybody should go towards God in the same way as we do, right? But I think when we actually look around us and then we realize that people have such different perspectives on like what God is to them, what the Bible is to them, what church is to them, and then we kind of get scared. Like, I thought there should be this oneness that unites us all, right? Especially in the world where there's so much difference. We want to hang on to our core identity. We want to hang on to our beliefs because this belief is what drives us, right? Like it gives us hope for a future that we don't know about and like an afterlife that we don't know about as well, right? But I think we need to re-understand this oneness. I think
Mhm.
Christians are really interesting people, right? We worship an infinite and eternal God, right? I think that is common amongst all Christians, that God is infinite, God is eternal. If you start to put God into this, like if you start to create this whole idea of what God should be and like say that this is what God is, then I think you're essentially like reducing an infinite God into like a singular thing. And I think that Christians aren't aware that when they start to say that people should see God in this way and God is this and this only and God is not that and that, then we are decreasing an eternal God.
Mhm.
So like infinity, right? The notion of infinity means that there is no beginning and there's no end, right? Like
Mhm.
like you can't like count like infinity, right? So if we all of us as Christians, if we privilege that kind of God, then why are we insisting that there should be only one way to do Christianity, right? Like,
Right. Right.
is God so small that like there should be only one way of doing Christianity? But then at the same time, I also understand why people are uncomfortable with that, because people know that, like, people are raised with the fact that if you do this and this and this, you follow this and this and this and this, you get into heaven, right? And then your life would
Mm.
be good and stuff like that. And while I'm not trying to take that away from anyone, like, I think it's good that you have a belief that you want to stand on. It's great that this guides your life and your principles. And I think if that gives you structure in your life, like, who am I to take that away from you or to tell you that that's wrong?
Right.
But I think you need to have an open mind, in a sense that you need to understand that people perceive this infinite God differently, even within Christianity. Like, different
Right.
denominations perceive this infinite God differently. And if God is infinite, then the body of Christ should be infinite enough that all of us are welcomed at the table, right? All of us should be
Mhm.
able to sit at the table. It's just like when you are going to, like, maybe like a wedding banquet and stuff, and your friend invites, all these different friends, of different beliefs, different skin
Right.
colors, different, languages, so on and so forth. But you all sit at that table as well, right? And you all partake of the wedding banquet, right? Partake the wedding
Right.
feast. So why can't heaven and God be like that, right? If God is infinite and if heaven is infinite, then there would be an infinite number of people with with infinite number of thoughts going to be at that same table, right?
Right.
At that one table, eating the feasts. So I think what as Christians need to be aware of is that people are just different, and no
Mm.
matter how you might want them to believe in what you believe in, they might still have a small little different take on that. And I think that really much is influenced by our cultural upbringing,
Right.
our politics, the place that we come from, what we strive to have in the world. And I think that goes back to the question of what America means to all of us, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, I was living in America for a while, and I can say this having been an immigrant in America, at least for a short period of time, that like, we have this whole ideal of what America is, but the truth of the matter is that every single person that makes up America is different, and all of us are going to have a little bit of a different idea on what the American dream is,
Right.
what America is as a country, how we want to live our lives. But the thing is that this country is still there, and we are all at this country, like how we are all at that wedding table, right? So why
Mm.
why why is it? I think it's more positive than negative to have these different views.
Mm. Yeah, man. I think, I mean, just to be vulnerable, I think, if I were to listen to this, maybe like, I don't know, 6 years ago, I would have been like, "What are you talking about, man?" But at the same time, going through the training and going through uh, some of the stuff that I went through at seminary and some of the conversations, it is not. I'm not gonna lie. It was hard to listen to some of that, but at the same time, I think even with their different perspectives, like you said, I think it's positive to have this
Mm.
openness to understand, right? To understand why people think the way they do, right? Um, and so, I think, for me as a
Sorry, Paul, I think you're breaking up a little bit.
oh, sorry, can you hear me now, or are we good?
Yes, I can hear you now, but I think the internet connection's a little slow. But
Yeah,
yeah, if you could,
yeah,
like, just like repeat your question, just the gist
yeah,
of it
yeah.
now. Yeah.
So I mean, cool thing about technology is I can chop this up later and make it all nice. And so no, so I was just saying that, going through the studies that I went through at Claremont and talking with a lot of different people and even working in a denomination where, like, working in a denomination where it was more open than other denominations, when it comes to perspective of God and perspective of, Jesus and all that stuff. It really opened my eyes to, like you said, have the openness to understand, right? Have the openness to
Mhm.
kind of think about where people come from and kind of think about why do they think the way they think, whether that's cultural, it could be political, even though I might not agree, right? I might not agree, and that doesn't mean somebody's better than somebody else, not at all. It's just for me, it was a huge opening, a breath of fresh air where I can sit in a table and talk to people that we have nothing in common theologically, right? Nothing
Yeah.
in common, but still have a candid conversation about God in a way where we're showing humility to one another and compassion to one another. And I think that's where American Christianity might need to start heading. And I want to be careful what I say, right? I'm not saying that theologically, for me, like, I'm gonna go that a certain direction, but this openness of understanding one another. Because
Right.
like you said, like maybe from, I don't know, I'm gonna say like 60 years ago or 70 years ago, America theologically was homogenous, right?
Mm.
It was a one-track mind, but then you have immigrants coming, turn of the 21st century, and more people come with different types of expressions, different types of traditions, and then their kids are marrying other kids, and even in my church core team, I got two ethnicities coming together, and they bring a whole new idea of what Christianity is. It's beautiful. And so when you start having a lot of mixes in cultures and politics and humans, you're gonna start having to think about, man, like, what, like, I have to open my mind. If not,
Mm.
we're not gonna survive in a diverse world. And
Right.
you know what I mean? And so
Right.
all that to say is, I think when it comes to Western, I think this notion of Western Christianity is moving away, right?
Right.
Because Western Christianity is that evangelical Anglo style of big theater church. But now it's more conversation, dialogue, relationship. And yeah, so I mean, that's where I think it's headed. What do you think about when it comes to church in the Western world, with immigrants, right? So how does
Right.
that bring another flavor?
Right. So I think church would be more homogeneous 60 years ago, but I wouldn't say it's totally homogeneous. I
Right.
think when people are already exposed to new ideas with globalization, right? So that started way early on. So I think if America is more homogeneous 60 years ago, there would still be little new ideas from outside that would sort of just seep into, right? And just having this whole consciousness that there are so many different religions around the world. I think that is a new idea in itself. And even people within the US start to question, why am I following this religion when someone
Right.
else that's halfway across the world follows another religion? But like you say, Paul, I do agree with you. I think in the recent few decades, there are just more new people coming into America. And because of that, there are more new ideas that are developing in America, and even like sort of more traditionalist Christians in America would have had their theology like sort of like progress. I mean, I'm not using progress as a word like a political word, but sort of
Right. Right.
move
Right.
on. Like it would have changed, right? Like even regardless if there are so many people coming in or not. So I think um, every generation would have to redefine and re-understand what religion means to them and what, like
Right.
in the case of U.S. Christians, what Christianity means to them. And I think you are quite right to say that as a whole, like church is changing. Not everybody sees like church in the same like sort of Protestant evangelical way in the US anymore. But the thing is that that is still going to be a core part of Christianity. Like I don't see that disappearing, but I see that slowly evolving into something new as times progress. I think we human beings overall are conserving, right? We are conservative because we feel that we like to live with things that we are comfortable with. And
Right.
if the style of worship or the style of church is something that we are comfortable with, we want to hold that on,
Mm.
for forever, right? Like as much as possible. I think that's not just for the evangelical church in the US, but even like sort of the mainline denominations and the more progressive ones like the Episcopal Church. Like I'm Episcopalian. And I can tell you that as much as the theology is more socially liberal and socially progressive, I would say like the church itself, the way we do things, the way we worship, like our ecclesiological structure, it is still very conservative, right? Like we have only one way of seeing the liturgy. We don't really want to include certain aspects, like change certain aspects of our liturgy that makes it a little bit easier for newer people, to
Right.
enjoy. We love like our church hierarchy with the priests and the bishops, but we can't. We sometimes we do talk about issues that we have with it, but people don't want to get rid of it because that's what they're used to, right? That's what
Right.
makes us who we are. And I
Right.
think it's the same for the evangelical church, right? The more Pentecostal style worship, the more like the contemporary music. That's what makes us who we are. But the thing is that we need to go into the future knowing that maybe certain tweaks have to be done. I mean, it's not like getting rid of everything, like that's like throwing the baby out of the bath water, right? I don't really want any church to get rid of things that is so core to their identity. But
Right.
how then do we sort of like tweak certain things that we're able to let people who are not used to our tradition, who want to find out more about us in? And it's the same thing with our neighbors, right? Like there can be a row of churches in America, right? Let's not talk
Yeah.
about other temples or mosques and stuff, but there'll
Yeah.
be a row of churches in America, and like a lot of them just don't talk to each other because they feel like it's so different. Like we are so scared. Like what if like things that we are so used to change? What if our truth, like with a big T, right, changes,
Right.
right? But I think that I guess there's more fear than anything because we fear
Mm.
the unknown as human beings. We fear the future because the future is unknown, right? We fear what's going to happen after death because that's the unknown, right? None of us can accurately say that they have like been to heaven and seen God, right? Like a lot of us, this experience to us is very personal. It's small, like we haven't crossed over and crossed back, right? That there isn't that happening in the history of humanity, right?
Well,
I mean, this
some people say that did so.
right. Yeah, well, I mean, this counts like
Yeah.
our theological understandings of
Yeah.
Jesus or like
Yeah.
when he
Right.
raised
Right. Right.
Lazarus and stuff, like just counting
Right.
that.
Right.
But like it's this fear that keeps us rooted to like what we are used to, and that's why I
Mm.
can say that as human beings that we are conservative as a whole. But it's like how we sort of open like small little doors to let people see who we are and at the same time be themselves, that we need to talk about. We need to be okay with like living with that like small discomfort. Like I don't think it should be a major discomfort, like a small discomfort that
Right.
maybe other people that we're not used to have, like an idea that actually makes sense as well, right?
Right.
And have their own truths that actually can resonate with our truths as well, right? And how are we going to open the door for that person, that we make them comfortable, like our neighbors comfortable, talk to them, like find out about what they're doing in their churches and be comfortable with that, while at the same time being comfortable with what we believe in, right? Like just understanding that the body of Christ is big enough for
Mm.
two different churches next to each other with two totally different theologies to sit at, right? Like being aware that both churches see Jesus as such a key example for them, that we would follow this person called Jesus,
Right.
right? Depending
Right.
on how you want to see Jesus or what God means to you. But
Mm.
if Jesus is so essential to that person, maybe give that person the benefit of the doubt that he loves Jesus as much as you do, right? Although
Mm.
that love might come from a different perspective, right? At
Wow.
least understand that the love is there.
Mm. It's tough stuff, so like you said, we could have a row of churches and they may never speak to one another, and I've been in those types of situations, and I've known those types of churches. And it's not even just diverse people, it's just even in homogenous communities. You can have like 5 different Korean churches in one row, and the pastors never talk to one another. um what I hear from you is, number one, the way we start is having this open mindedness of how people interpret God and be okay in the discomfort, right, at times. And number two is, continuing to progress in a way where things are going to change, right? But um there are things that's going to keep us where we are no matter what, and we're
Right.
okay with that too. And so, like, yeah, I don't. I mean, I don't know if Episcopalian, do they? You guys even have a worship band? Like, do you guys have electric guitars?
Some do. I would think that
Yeah.
the very known churches would have what
Right.
but for the most part, I think it's usually a choir.
Yeah. But one of
Right.
the things I do like, and I want to do, is I want to wear some of that robes. I do like wearing a good robe at robe and a good stole, and who knows, we'll see where it happens. But yeah, it's crazy having these conversations because outside of seminary, which is crazy. Outside of seminary, I don't get to be in these circles anymore. Um,
Right.
and just me being intentional about reaching out to these circles, it's something that I want to continue having dialogue. And again, we might not agree, and my truth, it can be a truth, but at the same time, if I'm open enough to hear you and dialogue with you, then we can have this relationship moving forward as people of God. What do you think about that,
Right.
Ollie? Is that cool?
Right. Yes. Yes. Most. Like, I totally agree with what you say. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know what? So to close this out, man, I think one of the things I've learned a lot from you is just having this perspective of openness. Every time every time I talk to you, when we even were in school, every time I just try to kind of give you something, you're like, yeah, well, that's cool too. And I'm like, man, this guy, have this open type of mind, which I want to continue to have, because even in the Protestant evangelical church, this word multicultural, multi-ethnic, um, can be sometimes misinterpreted, and
Right.
it's not as multi as we would like it to be, right? And so for me, multicultural doesn't only mean ethnic groups, doesn't only mean socioeconomic groups. It also means different subcultures, different, sometimes different ideas, in a way where we can open to listen, and
Right.
have dialogue. And if you choose, and based on the church organization, if you don't agree with it, well, at least we're having this dialogue that we can. And at the end of the day, if we have to go separate ways, we got to go separate ways,
Mm-hmm.
and so, and be loving in that way as well. Not like, we're never going to say you don't belong here. We might have different ideas, and so God has called me to lead in this way. And if you're okay with that, then you're okay with that. If not, we'll talk about it, and sometimes we just got to go our separate ways, I think. And
Yeah.
so, and be okay with that discomfort as well, and not everybody's going to agree with me. I mean, trust me, not a lot of people don't agree with me. And so, so
Yeah.
Ali, what's next for you, man? What's one of the things that you're looking forward to in the coming years, as you continue to go through school and life, and faith? What,
Right.
what what are we
Yeah.
trying to
So
do?
like, I would very much, want to continue my work in interreligious dialogue and intra-religious dialogue as well.
Mm,
I think a lot of that is going to be bound up in the stuff that I want to do academically. Like
yeah.
I'm looking forward to research with people of more fluid religious identities, and
Hmm.
that's a term that we have not approached a lot, as a whole, right, in academia and even outside academia, like in society, right? But people are just becoming more fluid in terms of their beliefs because of globalization and stuff. So that's
Right.
something that we can't really control.
Right.
At the same time, I'm hoping to go more into church ministry, with the Episcopal Church, slash Anglican Church, depending on where I am, in the world.
Yeah.
Hopefully that there will be a nice space for me, whether it's an ordained path or a lay path. I'm still, very much discerning that process.
Right.
But at the same time, I think, just tying it all back to what we said, like we're just recognizing the fact that diversity exists and that dialogue with diversity is important.
Yeah.
I know I was just watching a show slash podcast on YouTube, where this guy goes to visit churches around the US. I think it's called 10-minute Bible Hour. I think it's pretty good. Like, and he actually went to, and I watched the episode where he talked about the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Church next door.
Wow.
And I think a lot of people may not be very familiar, but I think there were some disagreements to stuff like ordination of women, marrying same-sex couples within the Episcopal Church a couple decades ago. So
Mhm.
there was a small split in the Episcopal Church. I think it's not as big as what's going to happen to the United Methodists, but it was just a small split of a couple dioceses and a couple of churches that actually left, and they set up their own, like
Mhm.
Anglican Church, Episcopal Church. But it was very interesting because in that video, like the host was sort of concluded with the fact that he spoke to these two priests, and though these two priests come from similar tradition, like an Anglican tradition, um, they sort of are aware that they have a difference in theological beliefs, and they have a
Mm.
different sort of like a church body that they belong to ultimately. But they are aware that they both have to exist because there are people on two sides of the coin. And the thing is that being of two sides of the coin, we are still part of one coin, right? We are still one human race. We are still
Right.
human beings trying to live and understand the world, but we just see it differently. And the thing is that we need these spaces to exist because people are just different, right? It's very hard even to like ask someone from a more conservative denomination to conform to sort of a more progressive denomination and vice versa as well. So like
Right.
that these places have to exist. Like these churches have to exist within the body of Christ. If not, then there will be people left out of the body of Christ. And
Mm,
I think that is more detrimental than having like two or three churches that disagree within the body of Christ.
wow. Yeah, man. Wow, you just gave me something else to think about.
Yeah, but
You
yeah, of
know what I
course,
mean?
dialogue is important.
Yeah,
Like
that's
being
good.
aware, like not hating on the other side,
Right,
like how these
right,
people like they were so understanding. They didn't say anything bad about the other side, but also being aware that it's not just about not hating on the other side, but coming together and just talk once in a while. Like
yeah,
just get to know like your neighbor, right? You don't have to agree with everything your neighbor has, but that doesn't like stop you from going out for a meal with your neighbor or like just
right.
finding out why they believe that way, right? I mean, we all have our reasons, right? And
Mm,
who is to say that one reason is totally wrong, right? As long
mm,
as you can come to common consensus that love is the most important, and
mm,
that we all care for each other as human beings, I think that ultimately is the most important.
mm. Well, you did it again, Ali. You've taught me something. You taught me something, and so you know what? Thank you so much for taking this call, man. And I just wish you so much blessings upon where God is taking you and continuing to journey with you, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen. And so yeah, thank you so much for hopping on this call and just sharing your time and your experience and teaching everybody something about how to love one another. And so yeah,
Great.
thanks a lot, brother. So
No, thank you so much,
um
Paul. I really appreciate being part of your show. I think it's a great thing what you're doing, and I also wish you all the best for your church and your ministry in the future.
yeah, man, thanks a lot. Well, thanks again for hopping on this call, and God bless everybody tonight. Thanks, brother.
Great, thank you.